What was your objective for this lesson?
I'd call this a dialogue frame. It's something I do a lot with elementary students, where you work with familiar language, clearly the adjectives and the what did you do last night were familiar, and you put it together in a frame. So you've got 6 lines, question, answer, you build it up, and then you work very carefully with how you say it. So the language is familiar, but what I think these students didn't have was clear focus on how you say it. And I worked with that very carefully. And then they got into their own choices where they could have dialogues, and then they just personalized it and talked about that. So the end point, you could argue, was them using that dialogue framework to talk about their own experience, but focusing very much on how they say it.
Do you use dialogue frames with students at all levels, or is it just for students at around the elementary level?
Much more with elementary, where they're just coming to grips with basic tenses, and therefore they feel very comfortable. It's kind of scaffolding, so that for an elementary student this must be terribly rewarding to be able to work with new language and use it in a fairly meaningful framework, and then they move on to use their own choice, their own personalized choice of language.
What do you mean in this context by scaffolding?
Scaffolding, I mean, giving them, they've already got it's already familiar language, so they've got the basic adjectives that are used in that and the basic past tense, but they'll slowly build it up so that it's supported by board work, by teacher modelling, so that they're not suddenly thrown into using this dialogue without, another word for scaffolding could be support mechanism, where they're slowly led into that until eventually they go and have their own dialogues. So whichever metaphor you choose, support, framework, scaffolding, they all fit, I think.
You spent quite a lot of time in this lesson working on stress and intonation. Is that something you do a lot?
I think I do, because students can learn basic tense formation from a book. I think something that we bring to the classroom is giving life to the language and focusing on particularly, as you saw in the extract there, how you say it. So you focus on where's the main stress and what's the intonation and is it rising or falling, so that it's a recognition phase and then they produce it, which I think worked in the lesson. It was quite effective.
How much do students get out of an intonation session? Do they learn intonation? Is it recognition we're after, or perfect production? What is it, do you think?
I think it's both. I think there is a strong element of recognition, and when they can then tune into the system and for me, it all hangs on where the stress is. So I constantly asked, which is the stress syllable? If you find that, then the intonation will hang on that stress, and then, as best they can, they produce the utterance.
A lot of teachers fight shy of intonation teaching. Why do you think that is?
Well, I've been working with intonation for 20 years, and I'm still sometimes confused myself as to the actual pitch direction, so I can sympathize with that. My advice would be work with where the stress is, get the general feel for the pitch direction, and then you can help your students. I think most of the students could hear it, partly because I exaggerated it, and when they actually practiced it, I think they were pretty accurate.
When you're teaching pronunciation, especially stress and intonation, do you use repetition a lot?
Absolutely. I've been teaching for a long time, and the generation that I trained with, we use drilling an awful lot. And I think when I'm doing in-service training or pre-service training, one of the techniques that I try to get over to learning teachers is the technique of drilling, and it's very powerful. It can be overused, but choral drilling, for example, where you've got a very tight model, the students will chant it once or twice for the feeling of the stress and the rhythm, is very powerful. And as you saw in the video, I then move very quickly from that into across the room, question, answer, question, answer. So, but there was a lot of repetition. So going back to the scaffolding issue, I think this meant that the learners were really safe when they actually went into their private little dialogues. They'd already had lots of safe, comfortable repetition practice with me controlling and me supporting them.